All right, ready to dive into another medical mystery.
Absolutely. Always up for a challenge.
This one comes to us from a listener who's particularly curious about congenital torticollis in infants.
Ah, yes. I see you've got the 1999 paper from the Encyclopedia Medico-Chirurgicale.
By Foreign and Felipe, right? It's amazing what you find tucked away in these old medical journals.
It really is. This was a classic, a bit like a time capsule of what experts understood about the condition back then.
So, like stepping back into 1999, what's the big takeaway? What exactly is congenital torticollis?
Well, simply put, it's when a baby's head tends to tilt to one side.
A bit more than a head tilt, right?
You're right. The paper calls it twisted neck, which sounds a bit dramatic, but is a pretty accurate description from the Latin torticollis. Basically, it's because the muscle running down the side of the neck, the sternocleidomastoid, is either too tight or shorter than it should be.
Okay, so holding your head in that position all the time must be uncomfortable for little ones.
You can imagine. And it's not just one thing. There are different types of congenital torticollis, each with their own unique causes.
Oh, different types. Like there's more than meets the eye. Tell me more about these different types.
Well, one that gets a lot of attention in the paper is congenital muscular torticollis. This is where we encounter what they call the olive.
The olive. Sounds like a snack break in the making.
Not quite. The paper uses olive to describe this firm little lump you can sometimes feel in the affected neck muscle.
Okay, so is this olive a permanent fixture?
Thankfully, no. It's actually temporary and benign, usually disappearing on its own within a few months. But here's the thing. Even though it goes away, finding an olive is a strong indicator that the muscle might continue to tighten.
So it's like a warning sign. Fascinating how our bodies work. But that still leaves the big question, what causes the muscle to tighten up in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question, and as you might expect, there's no simple answer. This paper explores several theories. One suggests the muscle might be injured during birth. Another points to possible restricted blood flow to the muscle while the baby's still in the womb. They even bring up compartment syndrome within the muscle itself as a possibility.
Compartment syndrome. Now that one sounds a little intense. What exactly does that mean?
Imagine it like this pressure building up inside the muscle, maybe due to swelling, which ends up restricting blood flow. This pressure can actually damage the muscle tissue, potentially leading to the tightening we see in torticollis.
So we're talking about a chain reaction within the muscle itself makes you realize how complex even seemingly simple conditions can be.
Exactly. And that complexity only grows when we start talking about treatment. One of the things that struck me about this paper is how they were already debating the effectiveness of early intervention back then.
So back in 1999, they were already wrestling with this question of to treat or not to treat. What were the arguments for holding back on immediate treatment?
Well, the paper highlights a wait-and-see approach some doctors favored, especially in milder cases.
Makes sense. Why intervene if things might resolve on their own, right?
Exactly. They observed that a lot of infants with congenital muscular torticollis actually improve naturally over time, even without intervention. So they argued, why jump the gun? Especially when you consider potential drawbacks.
Drawbacks like?
Well, think about it. Time commitment for parents, possible discomfort for the baby during therapy, not to mention the cost factor. These can all be concerns.
It's a lot to weigh. But I imagine the argument for early treatment had to be pretty compelling too. What were the main points on that side?
The paper presents a strong counterargument, suggesting that early intervention, if done right and consistently, could potentially lead to a faster and more complete correction of that head tilt.
Giving the baby's neck the best shot at developing properly, right?
That's the idea. And here's the crucial part. It's not just about fixing the muscle tightness. It's also about trying to prevent complications down the road.
Ah, so there's a bigger picture here. What kind of complications were they concerned about?
One that comes up is plagiocephaly, that flattening of the head that can happen.
Right, I've heard of that.
Well, it can sometimes develop alongside torticollis if the baby's head is constantly tilted to one side. Putting pressure on that developing skull can lead to an uneven head shape. Early intervention might help avoid that.
That's something I hadn't even considered. Anything else?
They were also worried about potential developmental delays. Think about it. If a baby's neck movement is limited, it impacts how they interact with their surroundings, explore, even develop those crucial motor skills.
Makes sense. It's like they're limited in how they experience the world.
Precisely. Early intervention aims to ensure these babies can develop at their own pace without unnecessary obstacles.
It all comes back to giving them the best possible start. But it sounds like there's no one right answer here. Based on the paper, did they lean one way or the other?
You've hit the nail on the head. Foreign and Felipe really emphasize an individualized approach, weighing those benefits and risks carefully, taking into account the specific circumstances of each child and family. One size fits all doesn't really work here.
So a lot of careful consideration. If parents are concerned, what's the key takeaway from all this? What should they do?
Don't hesitate to talk to their pediatrician. That's the big one. If they notice anything unusual about their baby's head position, the way their neck moves, early detection is key.
Always better to be safe than sorry. What else can parents do? I mean, even while waiting for a doctor's appointment, are there things they can do at home?
Absolutely. Being proactive is key. Whether early intervention is recommended or not, there are things you can do at home to support that baby's development. Encourage healthy neck movement.
So we're talking simple things that can make a big difference. What were some of the recommendations from the paper?
Well, tummy time is a classic for a reason.
Always a good one.
Helps strengthen those neck and shoulder muscles. But they go beyond that, suggesting parents get creative with positioning throughout the day.
Creative how?
Use toys, sounds, anything to encourage the baby to turn their head both directions.
So everyday interactions become little muscle building opportunities. Love it.
Exactly. And they do touch on gentle massage and stretching techniques.
That makes sense.
But big bodders should always check with their pediatrician or a qualified physical therapist before trying anything like that at home.
Right. We don't want any accidental muscle pulls. Safety first.
Exactly. It really highlights how important it is to work with medical professionals. Make sure you're using the right techniques for your baby's needs.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the potential for developmental delays with congenital muscular torticollis. Could you elaborate on what parents should watch out for?
Of course. Because this condition can restrict a baby's range of motion, it can subtly impact their ability to do things that are crucial for development.
Subtly how?
Well, for example, if they have trouble turning their head to one side, they might not be as stimulated by things happening on that side, you see.
Because they're not seeing it as much, right? Makes sense.
Exactly. And it's not just vision. Think about reaching for objects. A baby with torticollis might favor one hand because it's just plain easier to reach with that side.
Interesting.
These little things can snowball if they're not addressed.
It really highlights how interconnected a baby's development is in those first few years.
Absolutely. And that's why open communication with healthcare providers is so important.
Parents, you heard it here. If you have any concerns at all, don't hesitate to talk to your child's doctor.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up our deep dive into congenital torticollis. We've covered a lot of ground today, traveled back in time with that fascinating paper, explored the complexities of this condition, and hopefully given you, our listeners, some helpful information to consider.
Always more to learn, but knowledge is power.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.